So yeah, I'm going to do a proper intro, unlike I've done, I think, for any of these YouTube videos. So joining me tonight are David Fowlie of Keeping It Real and Emmanuel Noisette of EMan's Movie Reviews.
Hello.
Hey.
Yo.
And and we are here to talk about Andy Muschietti, Stephen King's It Chapter 2.
Yes, Chapter 2.
Yes, or as I like to call it, Chapter Number 2. I was not a fan of this movie.
Well, to get that right out of the gate.
So yeah, let's start with the high level impressions. First of all, where do we stand on It Chapter 1?
I thought It Chapter 1. See, that's what I hate about this. Now we have to call it Chapter 1, right? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, after watching Jaws 4, you're not going to go back and call Jaws 1.
True.
But it's all right. Okay, so the last movie, the first part of this epic adaptation, I liked it a lot. I was surprised that I liked it a lot, actually. I didn't know really. I guess I went in with low expectations because King's horror adaptations have typically been kind of uneven. I mean, look, we had a bad Pet Sematary earlier this year.
Debatable.
Yeah,
Debatable.
Exactly. Yeah, I know you liked it, but whatever. And how many times have they tried to remake Carrie? Anyway.
And they're sequelizing The Shining.
Well, that's actually
that.
From his own book, though.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, if you look at some of the best King movie adaptations, it's not pure horror. Maybe besides Misery, but Stand By Me, Shawshank, those aren't pure horror. Although there's horrific things happening there. So I went in with my reservations, and I was delighted, actually. I wasn't expecting a kind of tender, sweet, realistic adolescent coming-of-age tale. I was vaguely familiar with the book. I vaguely remember the 1990 television miniseries, but I was blown away by the young cast. I thought they were fantastic. I thought Bill Skarsgård was crazy good as Pennywise. And you know what? Honestly, when that movie ended, I was like, okay, I'm fine. I didn't really care. I didn't really care to see anymore. I mean, I was good with the way it ended. Sure, I was a little curious about what would happen 27 years later, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And I think the movie ended, and then, if I remember correctly, because I only saw it the one time a couple of years ago, it goes from black to fades up to continued in Chapter 2 or something. I'm like, no, because at that point they hadn't even announced or finished casting who was going to play the adult versions of these people.
Right.
So there was no bookend material like you had in the miniseries from 30 years ago, where it's the adults and they flash back onto the kids, and the first night of the miniseries is mostly the kids with some adult stuff in there. No, It Chapter 1 is pretty much a standalone. I think if you want to look at it as two separate movies and just not acknowledge the second one, you can, because they defeat the clown monster and they say, well, if he does ever come back, then we'll come back to stop it. And the audience can just imagine that the monster never came back. Everything ended in 1989.
Yeah.
I'd be fine with that. Like you were saying, David, I went in with I was hopeful, but wasn't expecting a lot. But I got a lot of positive, good feelings out of those kid actors, particularly Sophia Lillis, playing young Beverly Marsh. I thought it looked great. There was that wonderful scene where they're all they go sort of skinny dipping out in that lake, and then they're sunbathing on the rocks. So it was just a great, childhood moment, and you could take all the horror out of that movie and still just have it be, sort of this a movie about just a summer spent avoiding bullies. Take the clown out, it's still a really strong film.
Yeah.
So, EMan, where'd you sit on the first part?
I actually liked the first one, only because right before watching it, I mean, I had seen I never read the book. even though I own it, but I just never got around to reading it. And I watched the original TV series when those came out, and I rewatched them again right before watching the first It movie, just to see, like, because I wanted to get a mental comparison of Tim Curry's version versus Skarsgård's, and you know what I appreciated was like how they tried to modernize the scares, and I liked what they did in the first one, um, and also in the second one as well. So yeah, I mean, I totally was okay with the first one. I liked what they did. It wasn't revolutionary or anything in terms of like a horror movie, but I could tell that it was a good commercial horror movie. So if you're just not used to horror movies, or you watch one every couple of years, the first It would probably be right up your alley to, just get your scares in and then be fine later on. Um, and I kind of felt the same way with the second one as well. Um, Now, are we only talking about the first one, or are we jumping into the second as well?
Well, I think now that we've kind of covered our thoughts on the
Okay.
first one, you can lead off your high-level thoughts on part two.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so the second one, it picked up right where the first one left off for me in terms of like trying to modernize, um, not necessarily the things within the plot, but the scare tactics. So that's something that I try to pay attention to in horror movies. How are you going to try and scare me? This one did rely a lot on jump scares. A lot of those in your face jump scares, like a lot of action was literally coming at the screen towards you.
Right.
And, it was fine maybe the first two times, but after a while it was getting a little like, okay, you're getting a little too intentional with these scares, and it was starting to wear thin a little bit. However, I did appreciate the fact that they did a little misleading with the trailers. Because once that old lady scene showed up, I was like, oh boy, here we go. And I heard that collective kind of groan, I guess, throughout the theater, just like, oh, we know what's coming up next. And then they kind of flip it on you and give you something a little new. So I actually like the fact that they did that. They didn't reveal all the scares in the trailers, which was a nice surprise. But even then, once you get there, and this is just another slight irritant I have, just because it's so difficult to do. Once you start introducing comedy into all this, it's going to chase it. I mean, horror is like liquor, and the comedy is like that chaser. And it's kind of like it just really ruins the buzz of the horror element. And some movies have done it well. This one, not as well, in my opinion. But I do think that one of the standouts for me was probably Bill Hader's character. Definitely had like probably the most well-rounded, had the most memorable scenes, um, and probably the most relatable, just in terms of how he just dealt with his character and the situations. But overall, like, it was okay. It was cool. It wasn't like it was no Nightmare on Elm Street, as it tried to be, or paid homage, whatever they tried to do. Um, but it was fine, overall take.
Fine. Okay,
Yeah,
that's a perfectly good good answer. So, some movies are just fine, and that's fine.
that's all they give you. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
So
I mean, yeah, I don't know if you really want Fine to follow up isn't it the highest grossing horror film ever?
oh, sorry, you froze there a second.
Okay. I don't know if you want Fine to follow up the highest grossing horror film ever. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been thinking about this movie, and there's definitely some material in there that I wish they would have covered. Maybe some themes that I wish they would have covered a little bit more, instead of a plethora of brutality and jump scares. I'm going back to I keep on going back to that opening scene, and I'm just thinking, man, you could have really dialed that down, and it could have had a lot more impact. And maybe that's the parent in me knowing that my 13-year-old daughter is really going to want to see this, because you just finished making a part one that had a great charismatic, young cast, and then you have the popularity of Stranger Things, and so kids that age are going to want to see this chapter 2, and I'm probably going to take my daughter to see it. I'm a little reluctant to, though, because of some of the things that are here. I feel like this movie is a little bit more meaner and intense and brutal. Yeah, there's some humor, but I don't think there's more humor than in part one. I mean, there's a different kind of humor. I don't think Pennywise is as effective in this movie, primarily because we're dealing with these same characters 27 years later. They're in their 40s. You feel more for children in danger than you do adults in danger. Mm-hmm. Adults, adults, you're just like, man, isn't somebody just going to try and grab a gun and shoot this Pennywise guy? Or at no point does anybody arm themselves or anything. I guess, or at least prepare themselves in some way. I think, vaguely knowing where Chapter 2 had to go, I think Chapter 2 had a hard job to do in bringing the rest of King's story to the big screen, because there's some things that are just better in book form, and due to budget restraints and what they could show on television, we saw what happened in 1990. The second half of that miniseries looked ridiculous as far as what they had to face. This big huge spider in a cavern. And I think a lot of Chapter 2 suffers from splitting up the adults and finding their MacGuffins or whatever, their tokens, and then what eventually takes place in the I guess it's the sewers, the Barrens. Mm-hmm. It looks kind of like I should be holding an Xbox controller or something. I don't know. Now, that being said, I agree with EMan. I think Bill Hader's fantastic. Chastain and McAvoy are coming off the dud known as Dark Phoenix, and this I wish there was better material here for them in this. I think there's moments where I think that they're really good, and I think for the most part, the adult actors are cast really well as far as even acting and looking like their younger counterparts, younger versions. I think McAvoy overdid it a little bit with the stuttering, but that's another thing. Yeah, I mean, I wish I liked it more. I think there's definitely moments that are good. I'm actually, I know I didn't say this right away afterwards, but I'm actually curious about a second viewing, even though it is 2.5 hours. If I'll feel any differently. And I did notice that there is a different cinematographer in Chapter 2, which was curious to me. I'm wondering, I'll have to look it up, but I'm wondering, filmmaking wise, what else is different about this Chapter 2? Who else was not around that was around in the first part?
Probably an editor, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this movie's a mess, and it's almost 3 hours long. I think it clocks in at 2:49, including the credits, which, oddly enough, the end credits they feel a lot shorter to me than...
It was really short.
Yeah. like maybe it's because we're so used to Marvel movies where they've got like 5,000 CG animators that it just having a regular like 3 or 4 minute credit sequences seems really light. You know, with that amount of runtime and to what you were opening up with, David, coming off of a movie that still felt commercial, Chapter One, but it also felt as personal as you can get, I think, within the confines of a mainstream horror movie.
Yeah.
This was really disappointing, and I had the same problems as I did with the miniseries, and from what I've skimmed the novel a few times over the last couple of decades. I've never read the whole thing cover to cover, but once they get to the adult stuff, it's far less interesting, and I think the themes are far less universal. But I think if you're going to have this clown creature who draws these characters back in after 27 years, or they're compelled by this oath, this thing could really play with their heads and their emotions. We get little glimpses of that when they're first summoned to come back to Derry. Like Richie Tozier, who's the Bill Hader character, he's a stand-up comic now, and he goes out onto stage after puking heavily, and he starts having flashbacks to the people calling him nicknames when he was a kid, and he mispronounces his own name on stage, and he starts getting booed. So that wasn't even really Pennywise working his magic. It was just the aftershock of these buried memories coming up. I think a smarter horror movie would have played more to that, rather than the 15 repetitive monsters jumping out, CGI creations running at the camera and screaming with these razor teeth. I mean, it is just repetitive. It's all the same. Half of it doesn't even make any sense, because we do stray into that Elm Street territory, particularly in the last act, where reality seems to be, on the razor's edge. I'm thinking specifically of the scene where, what was it, the kid, Eddie Kaspbrak, who's played by James Ransone as an adult. He wanders into this drugstore back room, and he sees his mom tied up and is being attacked by this torturer.
Yeah, the leper.
That might be a hallucination, but he also is running around later when he encounters his friends, and he's still covered in slime. Like, what is the deal with that? When Henry, by the way, we're doing spoilers.
Welcome.
When Eddie Bowers or Henry Bowers comes back as the agent of Pennywise, he stabs Eddie Kaspbrak in the face. Henry gets stabbed in the chest, and they're still both walking around as if it was just a flesh wound. The rules in this movie don't seem to make any sense. They integrate, and this is a theme in King's books, like he's big into like Native American symbolism, but we're meant to believe that this clown monster was actually a giant spider alien that crashed to Earth millions of years ago, keeps waking up every 27 years to feed, and somehow is able to have psychic sway over its victims. But it can be defeated by these rituals of collecting totems from their the survivors' lives that they have to throw into this little leather teepee and burn up, and that gives them power. None of it makes any sense. It's like these weird, bad video game rules.
And the thing is, if you have a book that's huge that you have to carry around with two hands, that's covering all this material, what you just described, I can get on board with if it's gradually introduced in a book that big.
Sure.
But in a movie, even if it's 2.5 hours, some of that, some of the Native American stuff seems shoehorned and like, what? Wait, what? It just seems like a totally different movie. I don't know.
See, and I think that part of the issue there is a fault probably on the studios, because to my knowledge, King has like a connected shared universe, like within all this stuff. So, there were like little Easter eggs, like there was a quick shot of a turtle in the, in the classroom. So that was supposed to be like the great turtle in the sky or whatever. So, but again, yeah, you're right. Like in the movies, these things are not described in a way to have people know it, unless you read the books. If you read the books, you could be like, oh, I know that this little thing makes sense because I have all this background context. But for cinematic viewers and stuff, no, it's like, okay, this, like you said, like, it's just an alien. Okay. Like, you're just 3 light bulbs. Like, what is going on? Okay. All right. I guess.
Yeah. I think part of the problem, which I thought they were actually getting clever about it towards the end, but the Mike Hanlon character, who's played by Isaiah Mustafa as an adult, he's the one who never left Derry, and he calls everybody back once he notices that the deaths are starting to happen again. And he's presented like everyone has these, not glamorous, but they've got bigger lives than he has. He's living above the library. He never left town, and he's just become kind of the town historian, whereas you've got people who've become like stand-up comics and famous authors. And, I think Bev Marsh has her own clothing line with her abusive husband, which is really weird. So he's really trying to impress everybody, which I thought was a nice touch at the Chinese restaurant when they first all get together. He's got this kind of eager puppy thing going on. He's almost in awe of his old friends. But as he starts evolving into Basil exposition, and his role in the movie becomes just to like recite things out of books and take them on these weird vision quests, in the end, when they're fighting this thing in the cave and they put all their totems in, Pennywise looks at him and says, "You didn't tell them everything." And it's implied that all that ritualistic stuff didn't really work when the Native Americans fought Pennywise, centuries ago. But then they just kind of drop it in favor of more, horror movie running around and scares and, these weird solutions. Like, we got to shrink Pennywise down to size so we can chant him to death. It's just...
And it's just by kind of humiliating him, really?
Yeah,
or
you just
I don't know.
Bullies?
Castrating his ego? I don't know.
That... And I know there was like this reoccurring, joke or theme or whatever of, not liking the ending. And I was just like, man, that's so fitting for this movie. Because I was just like, this is terrible too. I would have rather them just stuck to the book, just do the whole little ritual of chud or whatever. And fine, just, maybe you have to believe stronger, whatever. But becoming bullies yourselves and making him feel like, that, I guess that was, to me, not a good enough payoff that I was hoping for. The first movie, I think, gave a better payoff in terms of how it ended and where it left off versus this one. Because after a while, I was just like, okay, just hurry up and kill it. Like, just, let's get out of here,
Yeah.
But,
I think that this chapter 2 kind of ended in a similar way to the first part, is because the kids get together, they band together, and they corner Pennywise, and in kind of the similar fashion. The same location, and they just take it to a different degree, and they're able to band together through strength. I don't know. I didn't see it so much as bullying as it was just really finding strength in numbers. And
they were calling him names. It's group bullying.
Okay,
You're just a clown.
I have
nothing.
I have no problem with calling a flesh-eating alien names.
Him. They were belittling him.
Literally belittling him.
Yeah.
And I think and that's kind of a cool idea, especially because there was such a theme of bullying in the first chapter that is dropped almost completely in this movie. Again, this thing is like it's like a stage 1 draft of where this movie could have gone, and there's so many different plots and subplots and hints of possible directions that it just is so unfocused. I think it would have been interesting if they did turn into bullies and what that would have meant to them. And is this Pennywise alien, is it evil, or is it just surviving the only way it knows how, right? Because it's an organism that has the ability to manipulate its prey, but that's what any predator really does. It creates traps to feed, and then it, it eats more.
It's confusing because
it is.
Sure, there could be that, but I think it has too much fun with what it's doing. For it to not be evil. The idea that he likes to present himself as a clown. And for years, for decades, kids have not felt like clowns were actually, something that they would like to walk up to and hang out with. Okay, clowns have always, as far as I can remember, clowns have always been scary to kids. Even when I was taken to the circus by my family, it's like, let's skip the clowns and do the motorcycles and the cages and the lions, and the elephants. So that, I think that it's not so much of him needing to feed, although he does. It does. I feel like he's really just being very, manipulative and to get what he needs, and he doesn't really. His goal is to torture their survivors, these particular survivors, and he does a good job of it. So good, in fact, that the adult Stanley can't even deal with coming back home to Derry and keeping his oath.
Well, I was feeling very much like Stanley Uris at the end of this movie.
Oh, jeez.
But yeah, I get where you're coming from, David. But I mean, I also think about, and this is getting way, I think, deeper than this movie even wants us to go. But if you think about like Muldoon in Jurassic Park hunting the velociraptors, he's having to outsmart his prey, because his prey, which he once had control over, keeping them in pens, once they get out, they become actually formidable, and they turn the tables on him. Pennywise is sort of in that predicament now. It's unclear that over the centuries or the millennia that he has ever encountered anything like the Losers Club. He's probably faced resistance, but even as we saw with those Native American tribes, when they tried to take him out, he pretty easily dealt with them, and they didn't come back to fight him again. So I can see him turning on the cruelty. There's a shot with a little girl, or a scene where she goes under the bleachers at a baseball game, and she gets attacked, and she almost resists him, but then he has to turn on the charm. And yeah, that could be seen as evil, I think, because he's being presented as this ghastly clown to the audience. But it's also a predator having to reassess its tactics based on the fact that the prey is about to get away.
Yeah.
That's something else.
Predators play with their food too, so that's not uncommon too.
And toddlers. But one thing, maybe you guys can help me out here, because it seemed like they were trying to mess around with the mythology of the clown, because when Bev Marsh goes to her old house and she encounters the lady that we've seen in the trailers, there's the photo, it's an old photo of old-time Pennywise as a clown who's like her grandfather or something. Later,
it looked like young Orson Welles or something.
Yes. And then later we see this character back in the old-timey days, and he's putting on his makeup and his eyes start to bleed like Joe Biden or something. And I don't understand what this has to do with the clown. Did the clown adopt this persona? Did he possess this guy? What's the deal here?
I think he, because Pennywise has been around for a long time. And I want to say the first movie kind of referenced this a little bit, like when they were going throughout the history, and you could just find these random events where you could see Pennywise somewhere, whether it's at a circus or whether it's at, whatever, just going back every 27 years. I think he just picked up, he just saw a clown maybe in the 1920s or whatever, saw how kids back then probably did like clowns. It was like, oh, this works. Okay. And just went with that. But I don't think he possessed anyone or anything like that. I think he just adapted and was like, oh, I like kids. Fear is the perfect seasoning for those kids. So clowns get kids. I'll do that. So I think that's what that was.
Yeah, maybe it's because so much of the third act turns into like a Nightmare on Elm Street thing. I thought they were trying to do some kind of like a Freddy Krueger type flashback. Like, this is what he was when he was a human. And I agree. I totally understand where you're coming from there. I just thought it was a visually interesting little gag that doesn't make any sense in terms of the story. Because you could have just as easily left it out and said, oh yeah, here's the clown popping up in these old picture books. You didn't have to actually give him a human character.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't too surprised, because we saw that this entity, this alien, was taking human forms, various, different human forms all along. So that that wasn't too surprising to me. I felt like that scene was effective as far as like a creepy factor. I thought the actress who played the old lady was fantastic, actually. But then she's got to turn into this oversized, crazy, gross hag, and honestly, it would have been just as scary if it was still that actress.
I mean that reminded
was the
me.
Anticipation.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and it calls to mind another Stephen King adaptation of The Shining, where you've got the naked old hag coming out of the bathtub, and she's diseased and bubbly and everything. But they used some prosthetic makeup, but it was still a recognizable actress. This thing turns into a cartoon with like the big flappy tits, and it's running around and it turns all big mouthed and everything. I'm like, no, if you really want to make this a horror movie and not just a third-rate carnival ride, you got to dig into what makes stuff actually scary. And I honestly don't think. I mean, I liked Mama, which was the movie I think that put Muschietti on the map.
Yeah.
But I still don't know that he knows how to do really effective horror.
No.
Or maybe it's studio notes. Maybe because it feels like they took all of the stuff that really worked in the first chapter and pushed it to the background, and all the stuff that was really kind of annoying about that first chapter and pushed it to the fore, without any of the really inventive stuff. Like there was nothing in chapter 2 that matched the thrill of that garage slideshow scene where Pennywise gets really big and comes after the children. There was none of that in this movie.
See, I think Muschietti did a good job with that scene in part 1.
Oh yeah, that was that was one of my favorite scenes from the movie, because I didn't see that coming, and that level of unpredictability, that is what can definitely drive a scary scene. But like Ian said earlier, it got too repetitive. After every moment where, what was the crazy guy in the
Henry
mental
Bowers?
asylum?
Bowers?
Yeah, like with the balloon under his bed. I'm like, okay, something's gonna come at us. It was just like, I get it now. Like, or even the big Paul Bunyan thing. Like, again, we just did this with the mama scene, with the old lady scene. Like, you gotta get a little bit more innovative with this. I don't know if this movie was supposed to be shot in 3D.
Was it?
I don't know. I'm just saying, was that the goal?
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Because if it was supposed to be in 3D, I guess, hey, here are the cheap thrills for that extra $2. But yeah, it just wasn't that effective. Or even if it was for that moment when you're probably like taken back, you get over it really quickly.
I think if this movie has one saving grace, it is the fact that we do go back and kind of catch up with where these kids were at the summer of '89, when after the fight took place in front of the haunted house, where they kind of split up. It was between Billy and Richie, and they kind of split up. I think they were apart from each other for like maybe a month, and then they regrouped after Bev was kidnapped. And I like that approach that, like, hey, stuff happened, and we'll kind of uncover that. And I like that they inserted that in this movie, because it does also, what happens in that time period, I think also kind of informs the childhood trauma that these adults are still dealing with. And I wish that this movie would have, those are the themes, that's the themes that I wish this movie would have gone into more, is how adults are still affected by childhood trauma and where they wind up and how they're basically crippled in many ways by what happened when they were young.
I mean, I think they kind of tried to do that. I actually liked them going back and showing us, like, filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
Because what was cool about that was the fact that even they didn't remember that. And I was liking that direction of like, oh, okay, great. This is an opportunity. And again, I don't know if this was in the books or not, but this is an opportunity for you to not only fill in the gaps, but maybe introduce some new stuff. Maybe there were some other things happening, beyond that. And guess what? You have an open, clean slate to just put in whatever you want. And yeah, later on we can grow up, have them be adults, whatever. And they just so happen to forget everything. But as far as like the childhood trauma and stuff, I mean, I think they still did. A lot of them were still holding on to. A lot of them were byproducts from their childhood. The guy married, uh, what was
An
it?
overweight
Eddie.
woman.
Yeah, yeah. Eddie married a woman that was basically like his mom, and like all the other, Bev married an abusive person just like her dad. So,
Yeah.
they show the traces and stuff, but
Bill became Stephen King.
basically,
Yep.
basically. So. I was a little disappointed with Mike though. Like, I mean, I know he stayed there and everything, but I was just like, I really don't feel like they did anything with his character. Like, what was he even afraid of? Like the burning house thing? I don't even think they drove that home. The way that they did with others.
Yeah, they showed a little bit more of that, like when he was a kid outside the door of, I think, where his parents were burning alive. They showed a little bit more of that, but I don't know. Mike was kind of just serving as the guy who's bringing the band back together,
Basically.
And missed, like Ian said, Basil exposition. I think I liked the actor who played him, and I think
Old Spice guy.
Is he?
Yeah.
Was it? That's
that
him. Guy. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Idris Elba actually lobbied for the role, but yeah, that would have been. You see, that's the thing. What I like about a lot of the adult cast is that there's maybe 3 people that you recognize, and everybody else had maybe some small supporting roles in other things, but it's nice that they didn't cast like, Christian Bale or Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's like, yeah, that would be a little bit too overwhelming for these characters. And I think, it speaks volumes of how effective the first movie was, because, here we're invested in these adult characters only because we still care about their younger versions, and we're still connected to them. And I don't know. I told Ian this on the way out of the theater. I feel like maybe this is how my kid feels when she's hanging out with adults. After a while, I was kind of bored hanging out with these adults, and I wanted to go back and hang out with the kids. Not that I feel like they weren't portrayed well, and it's just a different dynamic that,
I think we just had more time to connect with them, from an audience perspective. I mean, with the adults, it was just like, boom, here's this adult in their life. We don't know very much about them. Like, I mean, you're talking about from 12, 13 years old all the way to their 40s.
Yeah, 27 years, yeah.
That's a lot of stuff that we don't know what happened, how they changed and stuff like that. So, I mean, and I hate to say it, but I really didn't feel much of the emotional connection or impact that I probably should have with Bev's character, because I was just like, okay, yeah, she would. That seems, that seems par for the course. Or, even for Ben's character, it was just like, oh, he lost weight. Okay, he's rich now. How convenient. That's great.
Yeah.
And it was just like, okay, like, can we just get to the scary monster parts? Because everything else, like, I don't care, because again, we just did this quick time jump. And I wonder if it would have been better had the first chapter ended with Mike calling everyone as adults. Just kind of shifting it just a little bit,
so that you cut out some of that business.
Yeah, I mean,
that you see in this movie, yeah.
Right. So, like, at the end, we actually see them grow up, so that way we can kind of connect just a little bit more. And then chapter 2 starts off with, okay, guys, we're back. And then, okay, now we could just jump right into it.
Instead of that ridiculous, well, not ridiculous, but that unfortunate hate crime.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
only served to, I think, I don't like the timing of that only
Yeah.
because it, coming into the movie, I'm like, who are these people? What is the big deal?
Yeah.
Like, so are you just showing me that Derry is still a backwater, town or whatever? Like, what are we doing here? And it wasn't until like way later with Richie's character, I was like, oh, that's the guy that he was, playing at the arcade, and clearly they had some feelings or something, and oh, he turned into some homophobic bully or whatever later on. But given the way it was edited, I'm like, was I supposed to make that connection earlier, or I don't know. I didn't care for it.
yeah, it's unfortunate because that scene is how the book opens, or it's one of the very early scenes, and it's told more as the context of like a police report about this hate crime. And I feel like back in 1986 or whenever the novel was written, it was more of a cutting edge kind of a transgressive scene involving a gay couple getting harassed and beaten up. Setting it in 2019, it not to say that this stuff still doesn't go on, but it seemed a bit anachronistic. I just feel like if you're in Maine, I just don't know that there's that kind of culture there. It seems more like something you'd see in a different part of the country, perhaps. Maybe I'm wrong. But the
Yeah.
other thing is the Adrian Mellon character, who's the victim. I couldn't get on board with him because he seemed like a complete idiot. In the book, I want to say they were drinking or something, but in the way this film opens up, it's just him and his boyfriend at this carnival playing games. They get approached by these these local towny assholes who are homophobes, and instead of just like walking away, he antagonizes them.
Yeah.
And then they linger around the carnival and start making out, and then he's just, as they're starting to get beaten up, he's still like talking shit. I'm like, he has to understand the situation he's in, because me as an audience member, I'm like, okay, not that I want to see anything bad happen to these characters, especially for who they are, but they're
Right.
not making their situation any better. And this isn't horror. It seemed very exploitative on the part of Muschietti and the screenwriters,
Yeah.
so that they could show this violence and then they can throw the F word around a
Yeah,
bunch.
I definitely agree with that. Only because usually, if you're in a situation, let's say you're part of a minority group that's being discriminated against or oppressed or whatever, you know how to read certain social signs.
Oh yeah.
So, for example, if I happen to be down south as a black man and I come across a group of white guys that are throwing around the N-word and antagonizing me, I'm not about to go and encounter them and grandstand or whatever. Even if I have a friend of mine with me, if we're outnumbered, hey, we're going that way,
Yeah.
Right.
just like that. And now, and that would have been an opportunity for the movie to. You didn't need his character to go and push back and fight back, because clearly that was not the situation to do that. It would have made more sense to just have those bullies pursue them, stalk them, do whatever that they did. That would have been more believable. But to do that, yeah, I totally agree. It's more like, okay, there, look how bad these guys are because he's trying to stand up for himself and blah. No, that's not. It lacked so much practicality in that scene, and it was just kind of like, I actually didn't feel bad about the beating. I felt more bad about when Pennywise caught him, just because I was like, Pennywise, he's kind of old. Like, I thought you didn't like old guy. I didn't. What are you doing?
We're dealing
Messed
with
up.
adults now. Yeah.
Right. I was like, what is this? Like, I thought you were.
He was really hungry.
Clearly.
Maybe
I
that was his first
kids.
meal out of the cave, out of hibernation. He's like,
Yeah.
this tasty.
Down by the river.
And I think it also serves to. I mean, they're trying to draw some connective tissue to, the Richie Tozier character, who this was not in the miniseries, and I didn't read if there was this part of it in the book, but he turns out to be gay and closeted for all these decades, and it just seemed like it was connective tissue, but it sort of cheapens that whole story arc. Like they're just standing up and saying, look how awful this is, look how progressive we're being as a movie, while also showing this horrible hate crime in this piece of entertainment. That was the first thing that I was thinking about during that opening scene, was like, this is supposed to be someone's Friday or Saturday night out at the movies. They're going to go see the new Stephen King monster horror movie, and it opens with
Boom, gay
flashbacks to
bash.
Matthew Shepard or something. Like it's
Yeah.
horrible.
Right.
But that's
Yeah.
why I was saying, like, I think the editing could have been better with that. I mean, even if it started that way with the book, I mean, a book and a movie don't always translate the same way. And yeah, I mean, if you had taken that scene and maybe put it later into the film, like closer to Richie, so that way we can actually see that connection, I would have been fine with that, because clearly this film had no problem drilling very obvious things like Ben still likes Bev. And every time Ben is always, throwing a look over at Bev whenever, she looks at Bill. And I'm like, we get it. We get it.
Yeah, there's really, there's nothing subtle in this movie,
No.
unfortunately. And, I think that opening scene bothered me. And then the prolonged altercation between husband and wife, between Bev and her husband. I'm like, what is happening here? Why? I mean, it's like, really? I mean, you could have showed, like, when he grabs her hand, that would have been enough. And that would have reminded us of the fact that she married a guy who's like her father. But no, she had to be beaten. She had to be thrown on the bed. I'm like, really?
And later on, we've got the flashback with Sophia Lillis and the actor who played her father. Like, he's embracing her and like spraying perfume all weird, and all the implications are not good. But it just seemed like, for as progressive as I think this movie wanted to be, it sure reveled in doing horrible things to minority characters, if you will. It really bugged the crap out of me. And I think that you need a really steady and caring hand to pull off what this movie should have tried to pull off.
And if you think about it, if they would have shaved some of that off, because they already hinted at a lot of this stuff in the first movie. Mm-hmm. You could have shaved off that stuff with her father, the flashback stuff with her father, because they already we knew all that stuff. Yeah. They're just prolonging it and going, they're expanding on something that didn't need to be developed.
Yeah.
Well, especially if you really want to get into the psychology of where these characters have been at, maybe she did leave her husband at the beginning and go back to Derry, but perhaps he's calling her throughout the time that she's in Derry, and maybe she's waffling, like thinking about, well, maybe I will go back to him. Maybe I don't deserve better. And her friends are trying to intervene. You get more of a sense of who she is as an adult, and the trauma that she faced at the hands of her dad, and also the manipulation of Pennywise perhaps to treat her as a lesser character for his own selfish ends, because the weaker she is, the stronger he becomes. I think you can really play around with that and do that with each of the characters. Instead of just having these ghouls jump out and be all scary, like really make this a psychological horror movie that has some, slashery elements in it.
Now, just from my recollection, that scene with the dad and the perfume and stuff, that was a flashback, right? Like when she was in the room.
Was it a flashback?
I want to say it was a flashback, because I don't think Pennywise.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
And to David's point, that was a missed opportunity to just have Pennywise act like her dad. Like if you're going to go back to this, at least make Pennywise do, that hallucination, because at this point, Pennywise is Freddy Krueger. Like, that's all he's doing is playing on your fears. He feeds on your fears and blah, blah, blah. That's all they really needed. We didn't need the flashbacks at all, because they were just redundant, But, and a good example of this was when we met up with Ben's character in the classroom. We thought that was like a flashback, but it ended up being an hallucination. And I like that. That's what I was like, okay, give me a little bit of the past, because it was partially true, but then Pennywise comes in and like alters it in some evil way or whatever. Well, that was more effective, I thought, than just straight flashbacks.
Yeah.
Okay, they were still flashbacks, but like I said, it was this gap where they weren't hanging out with each other anymore.
Right.
And so Pennywise was affecting each of them like when that crazy scene, effective scene where Bev's head lit on fire like Ghost Rider.
Right.
That was a flashback, but it was also Pennywise.
That's what I'm saying. I
Yeah,
wanted more of those. I wanted more of those, and not so much of Bev and her dad, which didn't go anywhere. It was just, okay, her dad's creepy. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's some interesting balance going on in those flashbacks because even individually, I think even that scene in the theater lobby arcade where Richie's playing the video game and stuff, and then he gets called faggot and everything, and just basically like everybody's staring at him, and it seems like a very vulnerable time. I don't think Pennywise is involved at all in that, and so I think that there's some interesting balance where Pennywise is affecting some of them during that time where they're not hanging out, but they're also experiencing their own trauma as well.
See, but that worked because we didn't know that about Richie.
Right.
We already knew that about Bev, so that made that scene with the dad and the perfume really irrelevant. It was like we didn't need that.
They could have done something different. Yeah.
Exactly. But for Richie, it was like, oh, we didn't know this. Thank you for that flashback to kind of piece those together.
And it really helps with the whole arc. It's interesting that what we see that happened in the past is really kind of developing an interesting arc for who we're hanging out with, in 2017, the adult Richie. That being said, I think that, Hader's performance and adult Richie probably has the best character arc out of all of them. But, yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I think I'll have to agree too, but I think that's kind of by default because none of the characters. I mean, I think a lot of people were really excited when they announced the casting of this movie. You're like, you're getting James McAvoy, you're getting Jessica Chastain. These are all powerhouse actors who are given like nothing to do here to showcase their greatest performances, right? I mean, these literally could have been a bunch of unknown, almost like they did with the kids in the first movie. Yeah. This could have been a big studio picture and casting a bunch of really terrific unknown adults.
Yeah, they could have.
Who could have been? It could have their moment to shine. I was really kind of let down. Oh no, I was really kind of let down by that and by that joke, because I didn't think of it myself. Sorry. It's just this waste opportunity, and James McAvoy. It's hard for me because we just watched Glass, where he's taking on all those different accents. I kept thinking of him doing like his American accent sounds almost like a pseudo Mark Wahlberg, especially when he's getting all angry and stuff. And that was just really funny to me. He has some effective scenes, like when he's it just seems like really weird when he's approaching the little boy, the local boy on the street. Like, it's like it just seems that was effective just because he seems so desperate, and the kid is totally creeped out by this adult, grabbing him.
That kid got yelled at so many times. It's like, again, you guys are now the it for that kid. Like, that's traumatizing him.
Yeah, they became bullies long before they met.
Like, everywhere I go, adults are yelling in my face. I don't get it.
There's something that was another point of contention I had as far as Pennywise's inconsistent and inconvenient powers. Because when they go into the carnival scene later on, where Bill is chasing the little boy into the spinny tunnel, and they end up in the House of Mirrors, of course, because it's a movie with a carnival in it. There's that prolonged scene where they're on either sides of the panes of glass, and Pennywise is busting through to get the little boy. Yeah. I'm like, aren't you a magical creature that can manipulate reality and perception and turn into these horrible things? Why don't you just break the glass and eat the kid? And for that matter, why don't you just kill Bill, because you're in there as well? The flashback with what's his face? We were just talking about him.
Richie?
The fat kid. I'm sorry, Ben Hansen. Yeah. That scene where after the science classroom, when he runs and hides in his locker, there's this lovely camera thing where it pans over and you realize, oh my God, Pennywise is in the locker with him, and he goes ooga booga and giving Ben the opportunity to break out
so
and
cheap.
escape. Why
Because
didn't
he's-
Pennywise just
'Cause
eat him in the
he-
locker?
Because he's having fun.
He's having fun. It's just like, well, here's the thing. The fear is like a drug for him.
Yeah.
You know, he gets a high off of the fear. And it's kind of like with Freddy too, in a sense. Like Freddy Krueger. He never just out killed people. He would mess with them for a while till their fear peaked, and then he would, go in for the kill.
Right.
But
it was very rare that Freddy let someone go like that.
Oh, I mean, I agree.
Partially it was because it was in his dream domain and he had more control over it. But I mean, you can still give, if you've got that kind of ability, you can still jump out at a kid inside a locker, like in that split second it takes to rip his head open. He's going to be pretty scared, but it just felt very horror movie to me. And I'm like, none of this makes any sense, and I'm totally checked out.
Did you say it felt very horror movie to you?
It did. As opposed to the first movie, which was like a good coming of age story. No, it's the first chapter was a great coming of age story that had horror elements in it, and it kind of involved this clown.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, this one definitely walked it definitely felt formulaic. It definitely felt like this is how horror movies have been done. Let's do the same stuff. And that's the disappointment I have with a lot of horror movies. Just because finding a horror movie that will be daring enough to try to do something else, to be innovative with the scare tactics, it's so rare. And that's one of the reasons why I love James Wan, who's completely unrelated to this movie. But that's a very good example. If you watch his movies, the scares are not always the same. He finds different ways to play with the cinematography, with the editing, to really, subvert your expectations. And the first, it tried that. And as a matter of fact, staying with this director, Mama did some of that too. It wasn't until the very end that the movie falls completely apart in Mama, just because he and I don't know if this was a Del Toro influence, but it felt like it, just completely reveal the monster, the ghost, and now it's no longer scary. You put some little beautiful element in there, and now I'm just like, I'm not scared anymore. And I'm checking out. At that point, I'm checking out. So, it kind of felt that way with Pennywise here. First, very creative, very innovative with the scares. This one, tired. I mean, now I'm getting repetitive because the scares were repetitive. So, yeah.
It's funny, every time you guys are mentioning Mama, I keep on thinking of, I liked it. I saw that movie, but immediately what comes to my mind is Octavia Spencer from Ma. It's like,
from Ma.
It's like Ma. Ma.
So is Ma the sequel to Ma?
Oh, it could be the prequel. Yeah.
Oh, and Big Mama's House. Sorry.
Well, we have another Bad Boy, so might as well have another Big Mama's House.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think when it comes down to it, there's definitely elements that I appreciated in this movie. I just wish there was more of what I saw as potential, instead of these horror tropes and scare tactics. I'm definitely a less is more kind of guy, and I don't know. There's moments that were that were kind of highlights for me, and they were just like character moments. But there were also moments, some of my most question mark moments were also character moments. Like when they're in the Barrens and they're going through this, kind of labyrinth, and it's all gross and gray water all over the place. And at one point they're following each other, and Bev goes, "Beep beep, Richie." I'm like, how does she know about that line? Because that's what Pennywise said to young Richie, in the haunted house, and nobody else was around.
She was having those psychic dreams.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I forgot about the psychic dreams.
I don't know.
Why,
I don't know.
When she was floating up there and she saw these visions of the future as a teenager, when she gets that phone call from Mike Hanlon, maybe she says, "Hey, have you called everybody, you might want to check on Stanley. I know she's blocked this stuff out, but that's a bit.
I didn't care for this at all. I was just like, what's the point? Like,
Yeah,
what's the point
she's seen how everybody dies,
yeah,
which is
but
a
like,
cheap way of implying that more people might die in this movie, but they
yeah,
don't.
I mean, yeah, it's cheap, but it was kind of like, okay, are you going to use that and say like, hey Stanley, don't go to the pharmacy, or something like what?
Yeah.
What was the point of you having these? If all you're saying is just that because you saw the light, you are connected, in some way to Pennywise, fine, but I didn't see the point of the whole psychic stuff. It was
Did
like,
she know?
okay,
Did she know that Eddie was going to die in the Barrens? You know what I mean?
no,
So it's
no.
like, I
And
don't
I
know.
don't even think the dreams were consistent. I think she was just like, I've seen everyone die in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And she saw the guy that commit suicide in the bathtub,
Stanley.
but everybody else, I guess, maybe it changed or whatever. But it was just, but after that point, it was just kind of like, what's the point of you having these abilities or having those dreams? I don't know.
I know. I think it would have been,
Yeah.
kind of a nice, badass little moment if she delivers the final blow to the monster and she said, "By the way, I saw how you died too," and then she.
Oh, that would
kills
have been
him.
great.
Sure, why
Oh.
not?
Great. Yeah, I was disappointed in how they handled Stanley's, I guess his end. Yeah, it just seemed like, and it mainly is because I really cared about his younger version, and it just seemed like, okay, fine, I understand that, out of the, was it six of them? Out of this, six of them, one of them is going to feel really, really, really reluctant to keep their oath and go back. But, I don't know. I just felt like, again, more could have been. He could have been having a conversation with his wife, about how he was feeling. He could have been, it's like, you're just gonna.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like the whole thing at the end where he's explaining in voiceover that he was taking himself off the board. It just felt like not enough. If there was a little bit more early on to kind of support that stance, that would have been, I guess, I would have been okay with that. It would have been more believable. Like if there was something early on that he was really just having a extremely hard time, having difficulty with the fact of the idea of going back to Derry,
Well,
but we don't get that.
they tried to give it to us with the bar mitzvah or whatever the ceremony, the Jewish ceremony he was having. He was just like, I don't, he wants to be on his Peter Pan stuff, like I don't want to grow up. Like, I don't want to be a man. I don't want to be an adult. So, I guess, I'm just saying, I guess that was the excuse to show that he never fully, matured.
But even I could see that as being a nice bit of an insight as to what David's looking for if the execution had been better. But it's this weird little moment, and at the end there's a comic coda because Stanley stands up from the audience and starts clapping for him, and it's kind of played for laughs.
You mean Richie?
Richie, sorry. Yeah, Stanley's one of okay. But the miniseries, Richard Mazer played Stanley Uris, and the framing of that whole sequence was really done well because the people start getting the phone calls. And Stanley, when he gets he goes from being like a regular adult to, while he's talking to Mike on the phone, his voice starts getting shaky and timid, and he starts doing the thing where he's rubbing his ear, and you can see him reverting back to his childhood kind of mannerisms.
Yeah.
And then he goes upstairs to take a bath. And then the part one ends with the wife going into the bathroom and finding him with his wrist slashed, and he wrote "it" in blood, and then it cuts to black, and that's like end of night one. That's a really effective piece,
worked.
and there's nothing in terms of the way they handled his character in this movie that even comes close to matching that. Even if they'd done a shot-by-shot remake, that would have been more effective than. I mean, it's kind of a nice little moment of pulling back and seeing him bloody in the bathtub, but there wasn't anything really tragic about it. It just felt like, oh, this is an artsy composition.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been interesting to have a moment where he's talking to his wife, saying, hey, honey, you remember, let me tell you the main reason why I've been in therapy for the past 10, 15 years.
He doesn't remember.
Because, well,
he doesn't remember. I'm just saying, he doesn't remember.
I get it, but obviously something triggers when he gets the phone call from Mike. Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying that the fact that they don't remember anything is kind of like an easy screenwriting thing, where you get to start over. Again, there's a missed opportunity to really talk about how childhood trauma is suppressed, and that's why you don't remember.
Yeah.
Or the fact that if you're away from your hometown long enough, you tend to push down all those memories and maybe you only think of the good things. But again, none of that is really explored.
Yeah, and Derry being sort of this magical place that has that effect on people, the further you get away, the more you forget over time. Sure, maybe, but they think they need to go into the lore. Is that connected to this alien creature that has a hold over the powers. Town? Right, but again, is this some kind of a venom that it shoots out of its pores? Like, why?
I mean,
we're going from the magical to the alien to the mystical. Sure,
yeah,
and in the
but
book,
it's not in the movie properly enough, and I don't know if they're just relying on the fact that they're like, oh, it's a popular book, so people will know enough, know. But even if that's the case, it's kind of like, no, you still need to lay that stuff out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, especially with a character like Bill, who is an author who writes these scary kind of stories, that he would have held more onto the events that propelled him to write these horror stories.
Yeah.
This convenient amnesia, like even if you just give some of the characters varying degrees of remembering things, and maybe a couple of them have completely blocked it out because they don't believe that any of that actually happened, that gives you more to work with than, it's like a soap opera amnesia plot,
Yeah.
It's too bad we didn't get a chance to actually see what he was writing or what his movies were about, because 9 times out of 10 I'm assuming that they were actual situations that happened and he just didn't know it and probably thought, oh, I just made these stories up, but they were probably like, because they had a whole bunch of kids disappearing and bodies being mutilated and stuff, and it would have been kind of interesting if they had played on that too. But
yeah.
What did you guys think of the Stephen King in the antique shop bit?
Cheap. Like,
I mean, it was fun.
It was, but that's the thing. It was like,
we're
already going on 3 hours. Did this scene need to be this long? Like this an awesome. They could have just been like, "Hey, how much for that bike in there?" And then pull the paper down and Stephen King, 300, and then have him walk out. That's been the scene. And if you really wanted all the extra stuff, leave it for the DVD. You didn't really need to have all that other stuff in there. But fun, I guess,
Well, the problem is, by the time we get to Stephen King, we've already had, I think, at least 3 other instances of people making fun of Bill for not being able to end a book properly. If you would have just had Stephen King be that cantankerous shop owner who recognizes Bill Denbrough and says, love your books, but you can't end them worth shit, that would have been a great single, very powerful joke.
Yeah, just that one moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's like the 3rd time we've heard it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of repetition in this movie.
The one nice surprise, aside from the fact that the guy who plays older Ben Hanscom, Jay Ryan, looks like dollar store Josh Brolin, the one big surprise to me is that they got the actor who played young Ben Hanscom in the It miniseries to play the person that we are supposed to believe is old Ben Hanscom. There's a little bit of misdirect in the flash forward at the beginning of the movie.
At the corporate board meeting or whatever?
Yeah, he's kind of presenting it. EMan, I think you pointed this out. Like, Machete.
No, I didn't know this. I didn't know that.
But you didn't know that. But you said that the camera was very much focused on this actor, and you were wondering, like, why does this guy look like he's so important right now?
I was wondering why he was getting all this extra screen time. I'm like, are we supposed to know who this is?
Because
I didn't. It wasn't until you had mentioned it after the screening. I was like, oh, now the the actual cinematography makes sense,
Yeah.
but this is one of those things that's kind of like, and dare I say, even for the Stephen King, scene, are younger audiences gonna know like what he
No,
looks like? You know what I mean?
no,
Like, are they
no.
gonna? This isn't like a Stan Lee cameo, type of deal where people
Where
are
it
just
works
like, oh,
regardless, right?
where it works just because whether you watch those movies or not, you just know that guy's face. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like they just had more fun on this set, but I don't think it translates all the way to general audiences, but
Yeah.
there's a lot that could have been shaved off.
Yeah.
When I heard the fact that, okay, one is a rated R movie, so that's kind of limiting in itself. Then you're making this close to 3 hours. I mean, most horror movies need at most 90 minutes, at
Right.
most. And if
Yeah.
you
Right.
even get to 2 hours, you better have some a heck of a lot of like exposition, or you're doing some world building, or you're doing some heavy lifting, because after a while it's just kind of like, all right, well, can we get on with it? And kind of like what you were alluding to earlier, Ian, unlike if this was like the first movie that was a coming of age movie with horror elements, that can work for a longer time frame rather than a horror movie with I don't even know what elements this is supposed to have, but I can't have a stereotypical horror movie be almost 3 hours. Like, it's just not.
Right, because I mean, I didn't check my watch during the movie, but I felt kind of betrayed because there's a lot that goes on in this film, and at the point where we go, all the adults have regrouped and they're getting ready to go down into the Barrens for the final confrontation. I'm like thinking to myself, okay, we're in the home stretch. I've got 20 minutes left. An hour later, they run into Pennywise and have that stupid fight with the giant rock plant sculpture and all this other
Yeah.
stuff. And like, this is just, they spend an hour with them just running around, finding their totems, their tokens that they have to put in a little flaming teepee. And, the movie is divided up into 3 distinct sections, and all of those sections are way too long.
Yeah, it blows my mind. I just looked up that the first one was 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I didn't notice that length at all.
Nope.
This one is 2 hours and 49 minutes, and
They should have went back.
I'm usually the critic who I don't care about runtime. I really don't. But in this movie, it actually felt long.
It felt
I
like
think
27 years had
I
passed.
think that's the only time you should care about it. Like, if a good movie doesn't, if you can't feel the time, then that's good. That's fine. It makes the
Oh, right.
runtime irrelevant. But if you can feel the time, if you're like, gosh, how long have we been here? That's a problem. That means there's something's not engaging enough,
Right.
or something is just losing you. So yeah, I mean, in this case, it is kind of a knock, because there were a lot of moments that I was just like, just looking back in hindsight, I'm like, I don't think we really needed this. And
Oh,
even
yeah.
if you had taken some of those things out, like, I was thinking, how would this movie would have worked if you had taken out the kid flashbacks, and let's just say we had only the adults, only in Deary, only still being terrorized or whatever. I was like, that movie felt like it would have been maybe 2 hours, but then it still would have been less interesting,
Yeah, it
at
definitely would
that
have been less.
point. So I'm
Yeah.
just like, I don't
Well,
think
yeah,
they put
because
themselves in the best corner.
no, because every time they flash back to the kids, I just kept thinking, I just want to leave the theater and go watch the first one again.
Now,
'Cause
did you guys hear anything about the fact that there was some kind of like CGI smoothing or something to deal with the fact that these kids filmed these scenes
They
later?
It looked
yes,
like it. I could tell something was weird. I was like, are they in a dream state? Because some of them looked a little too clean,
Yeah.
But
well, and I'm glad you brought this up because I didn't look this up, but especially because we saw it on IMAX. Almost all of the scenes with Jeremy Ray Taylor, who plays young Ben Hanscom, the fat kid,
mhm.
looked like it reminded me of the early scenes in Brittany Runs a Marathon, where she's got the prosthetic makeup on to make her look really fat. This was like digital fat or digital smoothing or something they did to him. Like did he get acne that they're trying to cover up or something? Because he looked like a damn CGI Cabbage Patch doll. And I feel really bad saying that because I'm like, I don't remember him looking this unreal in the first chapter.
I'm a little disappointed they even had to do that. It was like, why didn't you guys just shoot those scenes at that time and then just save the footage for later?
That's what was confusing to me.
Because, you know, kids that are like between 12 and in their teens, they're going to have growth spurs, they're going to have acne, they're going to, you know, fluctuate. So if you know that going in, you should just be like, okay, guys, we have a tight window, like literally with your age and stuff. So let's get this in now.
I blame that on, and this is just speculation, but the first It could have flopped. I mean, look what happened with Dark Tower, which was supposed to be the opening of this cinematic universe. I feel like there's a reason that that chapter 1 feels like a complete motion picture. And, you know, they threw in that, you know, coming chapter 2, it could have been a Green Lantern situation where if it flopped, it's like, well, yeah, we opened it up for something more, but we don't actually have to tell that story. So yeah, they're, you know, perhaps saving money on filming any extra stuff because there was a lot of stuff with the kids in this movie that if they had planned to use rely that heavily on flashbacks, it doesn't make economic sense when you're making the first one to film half of another film that might not even get out of the gate.
I don't know, because if that were my thought process, I wouldn't call the movie Chapter 1. I wouldn't put that into the subtitle. You know, I would have just been like It, and then for the next one, like, okay, now It Chapter 2. But
I think that because if I remember correctly, the first one was just called It, and at the end,
it was It Chapter 1. Let me see.
I think they're calling it Chapter 1 now, but when the title came up, I don't think it was It Chapter 1. I think they just at the end it comes up and says, you know, end chapter 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's almost like something they threw at that could have been something they threw in like right before the Prince went out or something like.
No, you're right. Because it is listed as just It. Yeah.
So,
but later promotions put chapter 1. Yeah, you're right.
So going into this movie, I had rewatched the first movie many times just because it's now my daughter's like favorite movie, and I don't know how to feel about that, but but
you're a good dad, Dave.
So when you know she becomes obsessed with something, she just watches it over and over and over. So I was watching the deleted scenes with her, and that whole synagogue temple scene that we have in chapter 2, that was a deleted scene in the Blu-ray from the first one.
Really?
Yeah, so that was like, that's why I thought that a lot of the flashback scenes in this movie, I was assuming that they would have already been shot around the time that they shot the first movie. But after reading a couple of things here and there, it seems like, you know, there was some kind of like digital smoothing here and there, and I didn't necessarily notice it too much, but that's why I put out the question. Did you guys notice it? But sometimes that stuff can take you out. I mean, it's not like, you know, Henry Cavill's mustache in Justice League, but yeah.
I noticed it, but it wasn't nothing. I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like maybe the sun's a little brighter today. I don't know.
I thought the movie was like gaslighting me every time I looked at young Ben Hanscom. I'm like, am I actually seeing this? What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know, any closing thoughts on before we close this book?
I think they had a missed opportunity of, if they're gonna be jumping into the reservoir again, they could have all been in their tighty whities again, and you know, then we could have Jessica Chastain in her underwear jumping into the. But
you perv.
Sorry. Well, you know, if you're gonna be consistent. You know, it's like, hey guys.
You're all about the artistic integrity, aren't you?
Remember that time when you were in your tidy whities?
Well, they at least left out the scene from the book where I don't know if this is part of the ritual or something, but when they were all kids, they got sexually active with Bev down in those barrens to ward off the monster.
Yeah, I'm glad they kept that up.
Yeah.
Now, Mike was in that scene this time around, but he wasn't swimming with them. They hadn't hooked up with Mike just yet at that point in chapter 1, right?
I don't think so. He was still kind of like an outsider.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But he was with them in this movie when swimming around and kind of like washing all the gunk off of it was like a cleansing, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah.
I really, I don't know. I mean, I know that there's a lot of talk about how great Bill Hader is, but I really like that moment there where you expect Richie to have some kind of a, kind of wisecracking remark, but he's just sitting there in the water crying. Excuse me. And I thought that was, pretty poignant. I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, he allowed himself to be vulnerable.
And at the end, he's carving or recarving his initials and Eddie's initials into that
the fence post.
Yeah, that was touching.
Now that's the same fence post where Ben got autographed with the letter H, right?
I think so.
I think it is.
I think maybe.
Didn't have a lot of fences in Derry.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised that when they revealed, there's a quick shot when they revealed his 6-pack abs that there wasn't like a little H in there. Maybe he made so much money that he could have a plastic surgeon remove the scar.
Clearly.
Well, no, the H was part of the definition.
Part of the abs, right?
Yeah, that's why he worked out.
He specifically crunched on that degree just to shape them in.
Well, we'll see what happens in another 27 years.
No, it's okay.
It's daddy or sister will come back to Derry and haunt everybody.
There are other creatures from where it came from, so at least we didn't get the giant turtle. I mean, that probably would have really thrown people off.
I mean, think about it. It is crazy that we're going from It, the clown in It, to the DC's clown in Joaquin Phoenix next month, and then we have another Stephen King movie with Dr. Sleep in the matter of
I'm a little more
months.
intrigued with that.
Yeah, that could be interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna read I don't know if I'll read The Shining, but I'm seeing that trailer again in front of It. Yeah, I was like, maybe I should read this book.
Speaking of which, did you guys see the? I'm not sure how to feel about it yet, but did you guys see the trailer that's supposed to be released in theaters in front of It for Birds of Prey?
Birds of Prey.
No.
I think I did.
It was pretty funny because in the beginning it's this Warner's thing and it has all these red balloons. so and it has Harley Quinn come out and smashing the red balloons. Like, I'm tired of hanging out with effing clowns.
Yeah. So is it like it's kind of like what they did with Child's Play remake and Toy Story, where they're like do the cross. So is that trailer online? Can I go watch it now?
Yeah.
I'll have to do that and check it out. And David, I want you to report back when you do go see It Chapter 2, and just see if you feel any differently about it the second time through.
I will report back in the lobby of the theater. We're here at.
Hey, Bob.
Start streaming. Yeah.
Well, what's funny is I was walking my daughter to school this morning, and she's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, Dad, I was thinking, is it okay if my friend comes with us when we go?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine, honey." I already feel like she's like, "Okay, Dad, you're gonna come with us, but can you sit like 3 rows behind us or something?"
Yeah.
I'd be more
getting to that point.
I'd be more on the side of like, yeah, they can come along, but I'm gonna need a permission slip from the parents because we're taking to see this hate crime filled violent movie.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm gonna be responsible for this kid's nightmares.
Yeah. How about you, EMan? Anything to close this out?
Man, no. I feel like I'm just, it's fine. It's whatever.
It's fine.
It's. I feel like if you've already seen It Chapter 1, like you're gonna almost feel compelled to watch the second one. I would only just tell people to lower expectations. I don't personally think it's as good as the first one. But I also don't think it's
a different kind of movie.
It's a different kind, but like I can already tell I'm not gonna grade it as harshly, and the grades won't be as bad. I think I gave the first It like maybe an 8 out of 10. This feels more like a 6, 7-ish, something like that. It's something. Hey, there's really no competition in the theaters right now, so it's kind of like if you need something to watch, it's there.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So I'll end on that note.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I don't really have anything else. I think we've had a really good discussion about this. So thank you guys once again. And I don't know what the next thing is that we're going to be talking about, but there'll be something. We're getting into Oscar season. I know we're going to be talking about Joker, and for that one, we got to get the full council in here. So Don, I know you're watching this. I hope you're watching this. Get ready. We're coming for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, thanks guys, and talk soon.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Night.